So I mentioned a few times that there are other public key crypto systems, and I already mentioned Diffie-Hellman. So when Diffie-Hellman in 1978, 1976 introduced the concept of public key crypto, they were like, okay, we want to have these one-way functions, and in the end, the first one-way function was the RSA system from '77. What they had was not an encryption, but a key exchange. So the one was public key encryption. And so a description of it is, let's assume that there is a generally agreed upon cyclic group. And we'll go into what this group should be in a moment. Then Alice and Bob do the following steps. I'll have Alice over here, Bob over here. So everything which is in these columns here is going to be on their computer. So whatever eavesdropper cannot see this. And here in the middle we'll have a public channel where Eve sees everything. And now one of the things that Eve also sees is this generally known G. So everybody knows little g. Then Alice and Bob do the following steps. So Alice picks a little integer and she computes something which I call H sub A, because it's Alice's H sub capital A for Alice, which is G to the little a. And Bob similarly picks his B as an integer, and he computes H sub capital B, which is G to the little b. And now something goes over the channel. These two values get swapped. So Alice sends an email to Bob saying, hey, if you want to talk to me, here's my H. And Bob says, hi Alice, this is mine. And now Alice computes so she got Bob's values, this H sub B, and she computes this to the little a, which she knows. And Bob similarly computes H sub A to his little b. So first of all, yes, these are valid operations. Alice knows the public value because it's bound to the channel, and she knows her private value A, and similarly Bob knows the public value from Alice and her private value little b. Now if I expand this, then H sub B was G to the B, which is now multiplied by A. And this thing was G to the A, which is now multiplied by B. And now we're in a cyclic group, so all we're doing is just like operations and the exponents are in the integers. The integers are commutative, so b times a is a times b. So these are the same. So this expression, which is g to the ab, is something that Alice and Bob can both compute. Depending on how good the system is, Eve can also compute it. But we first go for functionality. Both of them give this system. Then later on we go for security and see what Eve can compute. So this is still the Bob box. This is still the Alice box. And now they have found a way to make a shared box down here. So both of them have this value. Now, Eve sees G as everybody else. She sees Alice's H, and she sees Bob's H. And so the hope is that Eve, despite seeing all those values, cannot compute this shared value. So functionality, A and B use typically the hash of this thing of G to the AB as a key for the symmetric system. So with RSA, the system was we pick a random key, then RSA encrypt it, send it over to the recipient. The recipient then uses this in, well, decrypting, encrypting, and adding a map to it, or to verify the map. In Diffie-Hellman key exchange, both parties choose a random value A and B, and then jointly they compute something that, well, neither of them has too much inference in. So they get some random value, and then they use that thing for further usage. So in symmetric crypto, they use it for encryption and for authentication. For example, you have your encryption key, which is the hash of G to the AB with 0, and you have that the authentication key is the hash, hash of G to the AB at hand 1 or something. So from this one shared secret, you get those two values. Or using a hash function which gives you 512 bits, and you want 256 for each of them, and you don't need the ones and zeros there. This is just one way of getting two keys out of this one value. So it works, but what can Eve do? So Eve is faced with this is called the computational Diffie-Hellman problem. So this problem is simply given G, G to the A, G to the B, compute G to the AB. So this is a security assumption or a math problem which is really exactly what the Diffie-Hellman protocol is doing. There's no steps in between. So for RSA we have to argue a little bit, well, there's no guarantee that you have to factor in order to break RSA, but you can certainly break RSA if you can factor. Now, the Diffie-Hellman problem is exactly the problem of what Eve faces in breaking the system. I've been putting computational there because there are also a decisional version, let's assume that, again, you want to make the life of the attacker a little bit easier, or the life of the defender a bit harder, and you want to say, my security assumption should be so good, or my system should be so strong, that even this much stronger attacker has no choice, and no chance. And that's a decision Diffie-Hellman problem where if gets those three values and another value, some g to the c. Then it has to decide whether g to the c is the same as g to the ab or not. So it gets a candidate value. If it's a random value, well, probably not. There are the size of g many elements. But the way that we usually play this as a game is she gets from two distributions, so again she has a 50% chance. So the decisional Diffie-Hellman problem so that is given g to the a, g to the b, and g to the c. Decide whether g to the ab is equal to g to the c. So if you're able to solve the computational problem, you just compute g to the ab, you compare it with g to the c, and it's solved. So the decisional problem is no harder than the computational problem. And we usually use the abbreviations, so DDH is no harder than CDH just compute the g to the ab and compare. And I said, but I didn't write down that for DDH we typically have just two distributions. So remember when we said, okay, here's the indistinguishability game. The attacker gets to pick two messages, ask the challenger to encrypt one of them, challenger sends back one of them, and then the attacker shouldn't have more than a 50% chance. Similarly here, for DDH, we usually play a game where the attacker gets to retrieve random values. So there is something which, some challenger, which flips a coin and then either outputs a proper Diffie-Hellman sample or one where C is a random value. And once it has done the coin flip, it will output many such things. So if you have any knowledge about how to distinguish those, you can win the decision Diffie-Hellman. So for DDH, we typically give the attacker one of two distributions. Either he gets sequences of G to the A, G to the B, G to the AB, or G to the A, G to the B, oops, G to the random. And you should say which one it is. With if it detects the correct one. Now all of those things will depend strongly on what this G is. So, what did we learn at school? Let's take G the integers. So what G can we take? So for example, G is, well, the integers aren't really groups, so, well, let's take Q. Let's take a subset of Q star. Namely, let's put G equals 2. Alright, so you're now a strong, powerful Eve. And you see that Alice is sending 65536. Broken? No, because I'm wrong. No, it's okay. So the enhanced Eve, which is sitting here with a pocket calculator, I'm looking at one particular person in the second row here. Yes? What? Eve would typically look at those things in binary. Now, powers of 2, we know this is 2 to the A, for some at this moment still unknown A.
16.
16, oh shit, that's broken. So here A is 16. And if you see Bob's value, 4096, you don't even need your pocket calculator anymore. You just see that this one was, anybody? 12, yes. So this one, first of all, we get an indication of what A and B are by looking at the length of this number. Now in decimal I should have used G equals 10, but then it gets too obvious. So I was going for the slightly more harder for humans, easier for computers version of binary. Your computer would see this as 1 followed by 12 zeros. So then just for asking the computer to count the number of zeros, you break this discrete logs, this Diffie-Hellman scheme. And over here you see there's 1 and then 16 zeros. Because, well, this is just 2 to the 16. So for this one, the attacker sees how long the number is and instantly breaks it. So this one is not secure. The binary representation gives a S length of H of A. Ooh. Okay, I now disturb this. I'm choosing 5. Now that won't work with the binary thing. But again, your computer can compute discrete logarithms of integers fairly easily. You will get some approximation, so it doesn't work. So similar. G equals 5, etc. Another possibility is you realize, oh, you want to reduce mod something. So the way that we break it is by saying, oh, we can look at the length. So let's take away this 2 from the attacker. Let's, instead of saying we compute 2 and whatever large power, we compute 2 to some large power mod something. Or maybe do a step in between, because why take the multiplicative group? Let's take the additive group. Let's take the G is the additive group mod P. Now for that one on Thursday, you will see in the exercise that this is no good, not good. up would be, well, how about G is a subset of the integers mod n, and then you have the multiplicative group. So this is like in the RSA case. In RSA, the exponent, the E, was always public, but we didn't know what the base was. That was the message encrypted. Now we would know what the base is. That's just G, but we don't know what the exponent is. This one is also tricky. We would need to know what the factorization is, but in the end, it will break down to the security of just one of the factors. So this would work, and we need a large n. Now, unlike RSA, it actually also works if we take G as a subset or equal to the modulative group of a fine field. So let me stick with the easiest example, which is also historically what Diffie-Hellman had in the paper. They just said, hey, well, of course we need some reduction. Let's take the integers mod p and then just reduce it. So this was used in Diffie-Hellman's paper in '76. And this works fine. Now this needs large n, large p, but not quite as large as that one. And this is one of two typical choices that you see on the internet. So any old browser will support RSA and Diffie-Hellman in fine fields. Every modern browser will also support elliptic curve cryptography with Diffie-Hellman. So another group would be elliptic curves. Again, that's for the masters. So this is used. And we basically have similar sizes to RSA. Meaning you will still find outdated systems which use 1024 bits, but we don't really like those. And then you'll find a bunch of systems with 2000, 3000 bits. And then G is points on the elliptic curve. And also those are over fine fields. We can do the whole thing in more general fine fields, but we don't really see this in practice. So G can also be a subset of FQ star for Q some prime power. But we don't see this in reality. And it's typically less secure than the prime case. So sometimes we run into those because we need some extra functionality of our crypto systems. There's some fancy stuff called pairings, which naturally lends in FP to the 12 for some P. So then we have these composite fields or extension fields. And okay, then we know what we're getting ourselves into, or research is still trying to figure out how bad it is. So this is something which p to the 12 looked great for p256 bits until 2 years ago, and right now a postdoc and me and lots of other people in the world are trying to figure out how much damage this does. So an attacker has more power over these extension fields than they have over the prime fields. I guess for you as co-students who have to do these things, you're happy that prime fields, yay, that was the easy stuff in algebra, and all these extension fields, the kind of iffy stuff, and now it comes out, well, we don't need the general stuff. Certainly not for this course. In the advanced course, we're doing a little bit just because some of the texts are actually interesting. Okay, now, when we broke this thing, we didn't actually wait to see the full Diffie-Hellman key exchange. We just looked at Alice's key, Alice's share of the key, and broke it. So in the end, we broke the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, we broke the computation Diffie-Hellman by saying, hey, we can compute A, and if we have A, we can just do the same as Alice did. We take Bob's share, whatever that is, and raise it to the power A. So that problem has its own name. It's called the discrete log problem. Full name, discrete logarithm problem. And I accidentally said discrete log a few times before because this is what we typically study. This is a nice clean problem where you only have g to the a, and you want to figure out whether whether Eve can compute A. So Eve is given G and G to the A, and is asked to compute A. So Eve knows everything about the group, knows the generator, and then gets this target element G to the A and has to do something. Again, if he can solve the discrete log problem, he can solve the computation Diffie-Hellman problem, and he can solve the discrete the decision Diffie-Hellman problem. So CDH is no harder than a DLP. So just compute A from H sub A, and then G to the, well, you're getting G to the B, and you're computing this to the power A. So that solves the computation Diffie-Hellman problem. There are some very strange groups in which DDH is a lot easier than CDH. There are not any known groups where CDH, the computation Diffie-Hellman problem, is easier than a discrete log problem, but we don't have for all groups that they're the same. So for some groups, we have that there's an equivalence between solving CDH and the DLP. So not just in one direction, but in both directions, but we don't have this for all groups. For some groups, these are equivalent. But this is not known for all. But when you have a text, then they typically focus on the DLP because it's an easier problem. I should actually highlight, there are not just some strange groups that I can't talk about, there are also some easy groups in which the DDH is simpler. So after this here, how can DDH be easy? assume that we have chosen our group G, which is subsequent group, as being the entirety of FP star. So we have some element which generates the whole multiplicative group. Now, if you take G to the A, and this has A which is even or odd. And we know that G to the P minus 1 is 1. Because it's a generator, we also know that this is this one we know for any element from FP, but because it's a generator, we also know that P minus 1 is the smallest exponent with this holds. So if you now take Alice's share, the G to the A, and instead of computing to the power P minus 1, we compute to the power P minus 1 over 2. So take G to the A to the P minus 1 over 2. Now if A was 2A prime, so it's an even number, then what we have there is G to the 2 times A prime times P minus 1 over 2, so the 2 cancels, and we have G to the P minus 1 times A prime, but G to the P minus 1 is already 1. So then G to the A, the P minus 1 over 2 is G to the 2 A prime times P minus 1 over 2. I said the 2's cancel, and so we're getting G to the P minus 1 times A prime, which is 1. Now if A is odd, so that means it's 2A prime plus 1. We have the same thing for the first part, but then we have another plus P minus 1 over 2. So then, if I take the G to the A to the P minus 1 over 2, then that's G to the 2A prime plus 1 times P minus 1 over 2. Okay, now we're going to split this up. If I have a sum in the exponent, it's a product in the base, so that I have G to the A prime 2A prime times P minus 1 over 2. This one I know already is 1, that's the same as up there. Let's not have the plus 1 here, so times G to the P minus 1 over 2. I said that G is a generator, so P minus 1 is the smallest number, so that we're getting 1. P is some large odd prime, so this is an integer exponent, and so this thing is not going to be wrong. So how can I use this observation to break the DDH? Remember, you're not just getting one example, but you will be provided with distributions which are either always Diffie-Hellman pairs, Diffie-Hellman triples, or not Diffie-Hellman triples. So the person who's making this distribution is supposed to pick random A, random B, and compute, or random A, random B, and random random. I just gave you a tool now. Do you see how this makes DDH easy? Anybody?
Well, can you just do this for all divisors, like 2, 3, 4, or all
You
primes?
can do all kinds of stuff with more primes, and there is even a tag for that, which is called polynomial tag. Nicely in line with progress of being very generous with giving names. But we don't even need to do that. Because what you were thinking about would get us a full discrete log solving by doing small primes, but just knowing things more too is good enough to break DDH. DDH does not mean you can compute AB. It just means you can distinguish the proper AB from some random powers. Yeah?
If you know that it is 1 for G to the A or for G to the B.
So A or B is even, yes?
And you know it's also 1 for G to the power AB.
Yes. So if you look at AB and you know from testing these or this that A or B is even, then you know that A times B must be even. So if you are in the left side where you're getting proper Diffie-Hellman triples, it will always be fine. It will always be, if one of them is even, this thing is even. And, well, if both of them are odd, this one is odd. And here, if this is a random choice, you have a good chance of observing that both of them are odd and this one is even, or that one of them is even and this one is odd. Just thinking of randomly picking even or odd for each of these three, they will not always match. So in this group, DDH is easy. Test whether A or B is even. If so, then AB must have matching parity and then you can compare this with the parity of the last entry. So for proper Diffie-Hellman, this always holds, and for the other one, well, has a pretty high chance of failure. This always holds for the H distribution and a high chance you have checked these two first ones, and then you have a 50% chance of getting the other one right. So you have a 50% chance of failure. So if the attacker doesn't have this special knowledge, he would randomly guess which one he's in, but we as smart attackers, we have figured out that we have a much, much better tool. So that means we really want to have a subgroup, so I've been saying subset or equal to. In the end, what we really want is a subgroup of prime order so that we don't give the attacker this extra knowledge. And that's also what we're seeing in practice. So what we're seeing in practice is typically you have FP such that p minus 1 is 2 times another prime plus 1, so that we're working in a very large subgroup of prime ordered. The consequence of this one is work in G, a subgroup of prime order. The last few minutes, I want to do an attack, which is called the data step giant step attack. And this is an attack on the discrete log problem. So this one is, you want to find out what A is given G and G to the A. So you're given G to the A, and you want to find A. Now brute force search would mean you start with G squared, G cubed, G force, G 5. And unless you're counting up to Christmas, where you're done with 24, this will be a little bit larger. Counting up to something with 4,000 bits is nothing you want to do. Data step giant step gives you a square root speed up, so instead of counting up to p minus 1 or whatever the group size is, you're counting up to the square root of that. So we write A as A0 plus A1 times something. And our search will now be searching for the A0s and searching for the A1s. So you would like to have those two sizes being about balanced. So we don't want to have that the A0 is just 3 values and this one has millions of values. We want to have that these are about the same size. So we pick M to be about the square root of the group size. And then, well, this is typically not an integer, but again, if you want to have prime order group. So then, again, the books differ in whether they round up or round down. I usually like to round down here. Okay, so we pick this number. And then we write our baby steps. And those are the computing the values I and G to the I. For I from 0 till strictly less than M. Okay? So that's the M steps I mentioned we will have to search through. Then we will sort those because we want to have easy access. Now, if you're doing this by hand, you skip this. So sort by the second argument, the second entry. So let's think. So when you're doing this by hand, you don't skip the sorting, you just write those few numbers there. And then third, compute, let's call this thing thing H, which is G to the minus N. One step, easy, just one inverse, and then finally we compute the giant steps. We now compute our target, namely G to the A times H to the J for J between 0 and M plus 1. until we find this in the table. Until this thing matches some g to the I. Now if we have g to the I is that thing, so if g to the I is equal to g to the A times, well, let's remember what h was, that was g to the minus m times j, then I move the minus mj over on the other side, and I'm getting that A is equal I plus mj. I hope this is still readable from the back, else you can see it on the photos. So what happens is, because I'm going halfway here, so I is half length, J is half length at worst, so I'm doing 2 times the computation with the square root of the group size instead of doing once the full group size. And 2 times the square root of the group size is much, much smaller than the full group size. Think of the group size being 1,000,000. We're talking about 2,000 steps at worst, which is much smaller than 1,000,000. And you might get lucky and find it early in the giant steps. All right, so this is actually one of the main methods for breaking discrete logs. It fits in, well, a few minutes, and it's a small piece of blackboard. And so this is the one method we see against discrete logs, and I wanted to have this here so we can do some exercises on Thursday. That's it for today. See you on Thursday.